Hello, and welcome to Beatna at Home 2021, and thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Tara Byrne, and I'm the Artistic Director of Beatna, Ireland's national festival which celebrates the arts and creativity as we age. The festival is produced by Age and Opportunity, Ireland's national development organisation supporting quality of life for people aged 50 and upwards. So this evening, I'm really pleased to present an evening of words and music with writer Niall Williams, reading from his novel, This is Happiness, accompanied by East Clare virtuoso musician Christy McNamara. Niall Williams was born in Dublin in 1958. He studied English and French literature at University College Dublin before graduating with a master's degree in modern American literature. A professional artist born in Crusheen, Christy McNamara is a keeper of the tradition he learned through family and community at home in County Clare. Before I hand you over, I'd like to thank Niall and Christy in advance and our core funders, the Arts Council and the HSC. Please check out our other events on the Beatna website and YouTube channels, all available at beatna.ie, and you can also look at ageandopportunity.ie for information on our other initiatives. Over to Niall and Christy. Thank you.
Lovely, Christy. That was lovely. Hello, everyone, wherever you're watching and listening to this. I'm delighted that Christy is playing music from West Clare and bringing me into this novel. So This is Happiness. Starts like this. It had stopped raining. Nobody in Faha could remember when it started. Rain there on the western seaboard was a condition of living. It came straight down and sideways, frontwards, backwards, and any other words God could think of. It came in sweeps, in waves, sometimes in veils. It came dressed as drizzle, as mizzle, as mist, as showers, frequent and widespread. As a wet fog, as a damp day, a drop, a dreeping, an out-and-out downpour. It came the fine day, the bright day, and the day promised dry. It came at any time of the day and night and in all seasons, regardless of calendar and forecast, until in Faha your clothes were rain and your skin was rain and your house was rain, with the fireplace. It came off the grey vastness of an Atlantic that threw itself against the land like a lover once spurned, and resolved not to be so again. It came accompanied by seagulls and smells of salt and seaweed. It came with cold air and curtained light. It came like a judgment, or in benign version, like a blessing God had forgotten he had left it on. It came for a handkerchief of blue sky, came on westerlies, sometimes, why not, on easterlies, came in clouds that broke their backs on the mountains in Kerry and fell into Clare, making mud the ground and blind the air. It came disguised as hail, as sleet, but never as snow. It came softly sometimes, tenderly sometimes. Its spears turned to kisses, in rain that pretended it was not rain, that had come down to be closer to the fields whose green it loved and fostered until it drowned them. All of which to attest to the one truth. In Faha, it rained. But now It had stopped. Not that anyone in Faha noticed. First, because it happened just after 3 o'clock on Spy Wednesday, and the parish was concertinaed inside the men's aisle, the women's aisle, and the long aisle of the sinking church, which at that time was still called St. Cecilia's. Second, when the parishioners came outside, their minds had been exalted by the Latin, and the suffering of Christ the Redeemer made inconsequential thoughts of anything else. And third, they and the rain had been married so long, they no longer took notice of each other. I myself am 78 years and telling here of a time over 6 decades ago. I know it seems unlikely that Faha then might have been the place to learn how to live. But in my experience, the likely is not in God's lexicon. Now that world, the world whose front doors were never closed in the daytime, whose back doors were never locked, but unlatched and entered on an evening, where you step down, God bless, onto a flag floor into a cloud of turf and tobacco smoke, that one has perished. And though some of its people, like Michael Donnelly, Delia Considine, Mary Egan, and Marty Brogan, have postponed the graveyard, and are in lonely old houses out the country that are home to rheumatism and damp and the battle of the long afternoons, its doors are shielded by caution and fear of the corrosive nature of nostalgia. And because I'm antique myself now, aware that by the mercy of creation, the soonest thing to evaporate in memory is hardship and rain, I understand that between then and now, as between mystery and meaning, there's maybe too great a gap. And in the world you're living, this one, the one where it stopped raining in Faha on the Wednesday of Holy Week, might be too far, too remote in time and manner for you to enter. But bear with me a while. Grandfathers have few privileges, and the knowledge of your own redundancy has a keen tooth. 100 books could not capture a single village. That's not a denigration. That's a testament. Faha was no more nor less than any other place. If you could find it, you'd be on your way somewhere else. The country is filled with places of more blatant beauty. Good luck to them. Faha doesn't care. It has long since accepted that by dint of personality and geography, its destiny was to be a place passed over and gently, wholly forgotten. How about a tune, Christy?
Okay, I'm going to play a jig that I learned from my father. And it was known when he played with the Turdicated Band as Max Fancy, but I think it's really another tune by a different name. But anyway, we'll go with that for tonight, okay?
Lovely, Christine. I could see your father's foot tapping.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Lovely, really lovely. I was not in St. Cecilia's that afternoon. I was 17. I had come down from Dublin on the train, not exactly in disgrace. My grandparents, Dodi and Ganga, were too contrary and crafty for that, but certainly distant from grace. If grace is the condition of living your time at ease on earth. What I was then is hard to capture. The crowness in me manifest mostly in self-contradiction, my character an uneven construct that swung between flashes of fixedness and rashness, immovability and leap. One such had landed me in a Briery boarding school in Tipperary, another had put me down in the thorny austerity of a seminary, and another out of there, when I awoke one night with a fear I couldn't name, but later came to think of as the fear I might not discover what it meant to live a fully human life. I'm not sure what I thought that was at the time, but I had enough sense to know there was a lack, and somehow that was to be feared. If it is true that each of us is born with a natural love of the world, then the action of my childhood and schooling, I was too afraid of the world to love it. It turned out it was easier to enter the church than to leave it. Father Walsh was my spiritual director. He had the pink, unmade lips of a baby with the ice blood of the county coroner. To ensure the seminarians remained single-minded, he was schooled in stratagems, gambits, wiles. His wavy hair, tamed by a gelatinous pomade, was jet black. His skin had never seen the sun. In a room weighty with the mahogany furniture favoured by the religious, his first tactic when I told him I was leaving was to say nothing at all. He tented his long fingers and tapped them, like a small church coming asunder and being pressed firmly back together. He didn't take his eyes off mine. Silently he ran through some inner arguments, the little lips tightening, his glasses glinting, until he reached a satisfactory conclusion. He nodded, as if in agreement with senior counsel. Then he explained to me that I was not, in fact, leaving, that he would consider me in retreat for a time. There were many examples from the lives of the saints. He was confident, he said, that when I saw what was out there, I would return with a deepened vocation. He stood, pressed the tip of his tongue between his lips, offered me his cold hand and a copy of Augustine's Confessions. May God go with you. I lived in a profound loneliness at the time. I'm not sure why or how it happens that a person finds themselves on the margin of life. But there I was. I was the opposite of sure-footed. I couldn't get any purchase on the ground and was unable to see how to belong anywhere. I came home from the seminary to Dublin, all rawness and intensity. My father, in deliberate revolt against his Crow blood, was very careful in everything. He had few words, short, dense eyebrows like dashes of Morse that lent him a look indecipherable. Your father is a mystery. It takes your whole life to unravel. After my mother died, he had taken the required 3 days off, performed the public business of grief, and then gone back into his preferred purgatory of the department, where a legion of men in grey suits were busy inventing the state in their own likeness. It was a common stupidity then to think of your father as unreachable. I did not try to reach him until 20 years later, the year he was dying, and the first time I ever called him by his name. I'm older now than he was when he died and appreciate something of what it must have taken for him to stay living. It's a thing you can't quite grasp, I think, until you wake up an old man or woman and have to negotiate the way. At that time, we never embraced our fathers enough. I don't know about now. I embrace him and say his name, Jack, now that he's dead. which is the kind of foolishness old men allow. I'm not sure it does him any good. Helps me a bit sometimes. For a few weeks then, I had stayed at home and he went to work. But there's something undoing about the dying light of mid-afternoon. In that empty old house on Marlborough Road, all that had stitched me into this life came undone, and I couldn't escape the feeling that folded against my back were wings that had failed to open. Over to you, Christy. That's fantastic, Christy. It's like nothing in the world, is it? It's just sort of otherworldly. It's just really lovely.
Yeah, well, I think it's because of what you read earlier on. I just felt huge emotion in what you were doing there, Niall, and I suppose it affected me really. And that's actually a song which is really a commemoration of. It's really about. Starts after Aughram's great disaster, so it's really comes after the Battle of Aughram when there was a kind of a hopelessness. Sean O'Dear Glenna would be the song, but I suppose there's a bit of just the sadness in it. I remember
yes
John Lyons sing that song, and it was just magnificent. So sometimes you just something in pieces
You
like
find
that singers capture, but maybe instrumentally that it's a different thing. But anyway,
no, it's beautiful, beautiful. Okay, we'll cheer things up with this piece. Hopefully, this is the journey down on the West Clare Railway. When my mother fell in Dublin for the first time, I was sent like a parcel down to the old people. It was not unusual. There was significant traffic of children in the country then, infants born to exhausted mothers or young girls, sent to be raised by maiden aunts. Others, to escape ravages of poverty or alcohol, transited to temporary guardians, some of whom they took to be their parents and became enmeshed in the secretive and coiled history of the time. People aspired to adhere to the teachings of the church, but for human beings, abstinence proved unequal to desire. More and more children kept coming. I was 7 years old. A white card with Noel Crow and my address was safety pinned to my jacket. I was accompanied by Mother Acwin, a large black and white albatross who smelled of bullseyes. Mother Acwin was a relation on my mother's side. On that side, there were several priests, nuns, and missionaries vanished into Africa, who we were to pray for, because they were all praying for us, my mother said. And with the softness of her eyes and the lamb in her voice, the boy I was did not doubt it. There was nothing of the lamb in Mother Acwin. She could have been second choice to command the Allied forces. She was on her way to take the sea air with the Sisters of Mercy. She'd take all they had, I'd say. As though a significant peril lay ahead, she set up a prayer shield over us in the carriage, black rosary beads harnessing the horns of her fingers. The ticket collector looked in, backed immediately out. The journey from Dublin took a full day and several rattling trains, each one smaller than the one before, with the result that arrival seemed uncertain and the country enormous. Always you were heading west, and always in defiance of science and geography, there was further to go. All boys were schooled on cowboy stories then. Cap guns are gone from the world now, but in my cardboard suitcase, I had a small silver Colt 45 and a black-barreled Mustang. When Mother Acwin left the carriage to see what inefficiency was delaying the tea service, I pressed my forehead to the glass and considered how fast the Apaches would ride before a brave could slip his horse, clamber onto the carriage, and come with raised tomahawk for Mother Acwin. In Ennis, there was a long delay. We were to transfer to the narrow gauge West Clare Railway. The engine and carriage were there. The driver was not. We boarded the carriage and sat. There were 5 other passengers, one of them a hen. I think the flat black eye of the hen put Mother Acwin off starting the glorious mysteries. Outside rain was falling and not falling. It meant the coal smoke did not rise, but curled into the carriage where to the other passengers it seemed familiar. Mother Acwin pushed up the window, but the air was already acrid, and on sitting down her fingertips were black. Touch nothing. Our fellow passengers, all also quite smudged, took on the natural timidity of those in the company of religious habit. We sat on the train going nowhere. We continued going there for some time. At last, Mother Acwin, who considered patience an overrated virtue, pulled me by the arm and we got off the train and marched down the platform. You, she said, to a low-sized porter in the uniform of a man 2 feet taller. The uniform was black, or black now, the trousers bagging at the knees and concertining down over his boots. Although the suit was shabby, the cap was firm and had a strap that gleamed. He was inordinately proud of the cap. What is the delay? We're waiting on the driver, ma'am, the porter said, and touched the cap to assert its authority. Is he a figment? Mother Acwin asked. The porter had known the latitude of public inquiries and considered that possibility a moment. No, he's not, he said. Well, where is he? That's just it, he said. Gave another little touch to the cap. That's just it, sister. Mother, she said, and gave him the albatross stare. He lowered his head, so we were only looking at the cap. Is there another driver? The head came up. Another driver? Because this one is clearly not available. Oh, he is, he said. He's available, all right. Mother Acklin looked at him. He put his cap a twitch straighter. What time is it now? She asked, pointing to the watch chain that looped like a smile across his jacket. He was pleased to be able to provide an answer. 4:15. And what time was the train scheduled to depart? New time or old time? He asked. Mother Acklin just looked. The porter may have been about to explain to her, as Ganga did one time, that during the Second World War, Ireland fell out of sync with the world. The British, with breathtaking command, introduced something called double summertime, putting their clocks 2 hours forward to enable a longer working day. The Irish did not. And in fact, Dublin was, is, and will always be 25 minutes and 21 seconds behind Greenwich. And as West Clare has to be further behind than that, Ganga said, it stood to reason that clocks were not a true measure of time in Clare. The porter looked like he might have been about to attempt to explain this perplexity. But at that point, the driver appeared. He was leading a white pony on a length of rope. Isn't she some beauty, he said, coming past where Mother Acklin had extended an arm to guard me against the station wall. She was a fine pony, but as skittish as my great Aunt Tossie. In any case, the driver took not one bit of notice of her little kicks and jumps and general spasm, but opened the door to the carriage and hoof, hoof, with a clatter of hoof, she was inside and tied, her head coming out the dropped window like any other curious passenger. We'll be off now, sister, if you're ready, the driver said, as he went past us and swung up into the locomotive. An instant passed in which my guardian was lost for words. Mother, said the porter softly, by way of correction and apology, touching the cap and marching away to perform his official duty of raising the signal. Okay, Christy.
All right, okay. I'm going to play The Morning Dew. It sounds appropriate.
Lovely.
All right, Niall.
From boyhood. In a high place where sentimental old men keep what sustains them. A hatful of fond memories. Faha was where an innocent grandfather would sit with a boy and play endless games of draughts. King Nibuko, his eyes glittering and his smile soft and genial because he had left most of his teeth after him in Plunkett's, the pulling dentist in town. It was where I would go with him and Joe, the dog, on intrepid missions to get Hector, Downes's bull, leading the beast back along the road by a ravelled twine tethered in its nose ring. The bull's pace slow, and his gait that of a world-weary and well-travelled gentleman, holding no apparent interest in proceedings, until he reached the gate and saw the heifers kick their hind legs. It was where, though the rain was a constant veil, there was never any water, and buckets had to be carried to the well and carried back again, slopping until you found that pace old as time, by which a man or woman walks with water. It was where Dodie, watching the sky, would call, "Drying," and we'd run out with the basket, hens darting after us in hen-brained forgetfulness they'd already been fed, and get the white sheets pegged and flapping maybe a full 10 minutes before the rain, bad luck to it, would sweep in behind a hurl of gulls. Those sheets would never dry completely. Evenings they'd hang on 2 chairs across from the fire and be turf-smoked in down-puffs every time someone opened the back door to come for a cool. Still, they wouldn't be dry, but what of it? You'd sleep in them all the same. The heat of humanity, the last stage of drying, smoke and rain, making otherworldly your dreams. It was the smell of bread always baking, the smell of turf smoke, the smell of onions, of boiling, the green tongue of cabbage, the pink one of bacon with grey scum rising, the smell of rhubarb that grew monstrous at the edge of the dung heap, the smell of rain in all its iterations, the smell of distant rain, of being about to rain, of recent rain, of long ago rain, the insipid smell of drizzle, the sweet one of downpour, the living smell of wool, the dead smell of stone, the metallic ghost stench of mackerel that disobeyed the laws of matter and, like Jesus, outlived itself by 3 days. It was where you were left to your own devices, where a child with the diminished name of Noe was let off, out the door and into the soft, damp wonder of the world. A piece of piping or stick his sword, and pools and drains and ditches his country. A country which yielded untreasures, a half-buried boot, a verdigris coin, or the oyster gloop of tadpoles. It was where a boy of no more than 8 could come clopping past on a horse, bareback, eyes wild as he clutched the mane, exulting in a speed he was not in control of as he raced past you and on into story time. Where a man might come along the road after, carrying a hames and asking, "Have you seen a horse at all?" It was where you lived by the clock of your stomach, came back to the house only when you were hungry, ate whatever was put before you, and ran out again, only partly aware of the privilege of solitude and the gift of time. It was where once, in town, I watched my grandfather come out of Bruges, take a big copper penny from his pocket and place it on the path and walk away. When I asked him why, he smiled an iceberg smile whose depths were unknown and said, "The man, woman, or child that finds that will think it's their lucky day." He delivered a large wink and added, "And it will be." It was where I sat inside on the back step of Blake's, Keen's, Cotter's, and O'Shea's kitchens on the nights of house dances, where, after an eternity, the adults pushed back the table and various chairs and forums to clear the flagstones for the sets, leaving stools for the musicians, where cigarettes were served on saucers, and where, like a benevolent spirit, smoke hung permanently along the ceiling, where the music would take another age to start up. But when it did, Ganga and Dodie would put away their disputes and lose 40 years, springing into improbable steps like figures in fables, dancing without looking at each other, her hand inside the mitt of his, faraway looks on their faces as their bodies spun and their feet kept time. Faha was where, one day when I was 10, Ganga, his own fingers crook-shaped from the handles of shovels, had gone into the room down and rooted about and come back bearing a case and said, "Now, Noi, here, try the fiddle." Faha was where I had learned music. Over to you, Christy. That's marvelous, Christy. One of the things this novel tries to do is the impossible business of trying to capture something like that sense of music in Clare. And one of the things that happens is the characters set out to try to hear the legendary Junior Crehan. So here's a little passage about that. Now, you may not be able to credit what the music meant in Clare, means still, and what the name Junior Crehan stood for. The origins of it are in story time. They're in the dust of the roads and the memories of birds. They're in the bars of the rain and the floods and the tides and the salt of the air and the thorns of the ditches. Like all stories of music, there are various strings to it. Once there was this child, blind from birth or near enough, but what they did in that time was give the child a set of pipes to play, believing that one sense dead, the others awoke. And if he played the pipes, he'd have a trade and make his way in the world. And this blind child became a man, Gareth Barry, and he was small and when grown, black-bearded. And by the senses of feeling and hearing, travelled the country in and around Milltown and Mullaght and Ina, and south of there too, down into Kilmurray and on down into Faha, playing airs and making a living and becoming in his time a small sensation. So that his playing stopped, but work was being done. and made the mark of a different world on that day, so that any who heard him recalled it, even under the nodding of their dotage. Now, this was back in old God's time, and in that time Gareth visited Casey's house in Anna, where Tom the Master lived. And Tom had the music and played the timber flute, and his son was Thaddy, who had the timing in him, and it was said could pick a tune out of the breeze. And though Garrett would die in the Ennistimon workhouse and be buried in an unmarked grave in Ina, before he did, he left the tunes after him. So Thaddy Casey became a dancing master, travelling around and teaching the Caledonian and other sets and making step dancers, with a 12-inch rule that he struck none too lightly on the calves if the dancers weren't in the right time or getting off the ground. The same Thaddy put buckets and saucepans under the flagstones where he was laying the floor of his house in Anna so the batter of the dancing would ring. That house is there still, I believe, on the road in from the ocean. Thaddy had a cousin, Scully, and Scully Casey on the fiddle became the mentor to many, one of whom was Junior Crehan. Junior was Martin, but his father was Martin too, and Martin Sr. lived past 90. So Junior stayed Junior. Once he heard a tune, it never left him, they said. There were players everywhere in the townlands around him, in the parish of Mullock. It was common to hear music played in the evenings, and he went out nights to play the fiddle at house dances far and wide, hiding his pajamas in the barn, so he could sneak in home at dawn, escape the look of Senior, and snatch the small sleep of the rapture, the reels still spinning in his head. And because the music was not written down, because it lived in the air in the moments of its playing, and then in that place between the fingers and the memory, the players were its custodians. In time, Junior Crehan carried so much music in him, he became a one-man repository, both modest and legendary. A walking encyclopedia of tunes, dances, airs, and stories, in whose playing was the playing of all before him, on back into the mists of long ago. Although we didn't know it then, that summer a young man, Kieran McMahuna, would roll down from Dublin to Clare to call to houses, to step inside back doorways onto flagged kitchens with open hearths and no electricity, and with the help of the country's first mobile recording unit, start to record the players. He'd be received with the venerable courtesies of country people. Cups of tea that hills of sugar couldn't sweeten, cuts of ham and griddle bread he would put on a stone that summer, he'd say, because each time he would be feasted before he could get around to requesting a tune. And then, with the natural bashfulness of those who in the purest sense were amateur, and always believed there were better players elsewhere that he should be recording, aware that they were carriers of a tradition that was passing through them, but reserved and absent in vanity. They would be coaxed an hour, two sometimes, but at last, in the dim light of their kitchens and parlours, play. And in that play, another time would be summoned, the time of dancing masters and travelling pipers, because in it was a threshold, across which it was still possible to pass and be at the races on the sands at Spanish Point, or at the fair days and football matches, along roads and across fields and time, and still be where, in the playing now of Junior Crehan and the like, was recalled the soul of a people, the pulse of a place, and 100 years of music. Over to you, Christy.
Oh, nice. You said it all so well. Thanks,
Lovely,
Sinead.
Christy. Really terrific. That's a junior tune?
That's the junior tune, and it's called Coshlan Or, the Golden Castle. And
Yeah.
I was lucky to know Junior, and I think like people of his generation, they carry the music that we play, and
Yeah.
he would. But Junior was a great storyteller, a lovely character, and just he carried it when it wasn't popular, and my father would be of that generation as well. So I was lucky to be around people like that, and I really think you've told that story so wonderful. So it's lovely to be doing this with you now.
Well, thank you, Christy. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing you. I'm sorry that we can't just all pop in for tea somewhere now and just, sit around the fire, but still lovely to, hear you play. And, I'm honored to have the music in and around the book, which is in its own way an attempt to honor those people. So that was lovely. Okay. Thank you. And thank everybody. Thank everybody for whoever is out there watching and listening to us.